It was an ordinary morning in the small mountain town until suddenly, a deep rumble shattered the silence. The sound of rolling rocks, the desperate screams of people running. What happened that day was something no one could have imagined. A landslide, which seemed like something common in those regions, but at that moment, it destroyed everything. Houses, streets, trees. Everything was swept away by the immense force of nature. But what no one knew was that, amidst this chaos, there was a pregnant woman, about to have her life and that of everyone around her completely transformed. As everyone fought to survive, she was found among the rubble, almost lifeless, but with something very important on her mind. Her eyes, filled with fear and terror, did not fade, but her breathing was labored. And despite all the pain, she was rescued, pulled from that place with the help of brave people who did everything they could to ensure she made it out alive. It was impossible not to wonder, what happened there? How did she survive? But, most importantly, what did she know that no one else did? The secret she carried could change everything. But what no one expected was that this secret was directly tied to something much bigger than the landslide. The woman, still in shock, was taken to the hospital. Even with visible injuries, something in her gaze showed that the fight was not over. There, in the midst of recovery, she would hold on to something that no one could imagine. Something that, at first, seemed like mere coincidence but would soon reveal itself to be the link between that disaster and something much deeper, involving powerful people and secrets that could affect everyone. When she finally spoke, what she revealed shook the foundations of everything we thought we knew about the history of that landslide. And that was when the questions began to arise. Who was the father of the baby? What really happened that fateful morning? And, perhaps the most important question of all, why did the truth seem so far from everything we had known until then? Because, when the landslide happened, no one was prepared for the story it would bring with it. A story that, when told, could change everything. I never thought that an ordinary morning could turn into such a huge nightmare. The city, which had always been peaceful, surrounded by the mountains that protected it from many dangers, now seemed to be the setting for a tragedy waiting to happen. But it wasn't just the force of nature that caught us off guard, it was the chaos that would unfold afterward, something no one, not even the most experienced, could foresee. The city was used to storms, heavy rains that sometimes caused small landslides. But that day was different. The sky was cloudy, the wind was blowing strong, but no one seemed to worry. I was in the city center, walking peacefully down a narrow street, when the ground began to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake, but something stronger, more threatening. I saw the first rocks fall from the mountains, a loud noise, like distant thunder, but heavier. Before I knew it, chaos was already in full swing. Screams echoed throughout the city. People running, trying to find shelter, trying to save their lives. But there was nowhere to run. The landslide was fast, violent, sweeping everything in its path. The streets we knew, the houses where we grew up, the parked cars, everything was gone in a matter of minutes. I was there, frozen, watching it all unfold. Everything turned to mud, rocks, and debris. There was no safe place left. Dust rose into the air, and for a moment, everything went dark. Then I saw something that would stay with me forever. A group of people running toward the epicenter of the disaster. They were heading into the heart of the confusion, where the risk of life was highest. I followed the gaze of each one of them, and I realized they were trying to rescue someone. But who? When I realized, I saw it was a woman, a pregnant woman, trapped under a pile of rubble. She was there, practically immobilized, unable to move. The fear in her eyes was visible, and the desperation of not being able to do anything for her paralyzed me for a moment. The group that rescued her did the impossible. They managed to get her out of there, despite the unstable ground and the threat of further landslides. Every second was crucial. Every movement they made seemed to be balancing the fate of that woman and her baby. I watched from a distance, unable to get closer, but I knew something big was happening. It wasn't just the heroic effort to save a life. Something was going on there, something I still didn't understand. They rushed the woman to the hospital in a race against time. The tension hung in the air. We knew she was alive, but how long would that last? She didn't seem conscious, but even so, there was something in her gaze. Something that told me she knew more than she was willing to say. Questions began to arise. What did she know? How did she end up in the middle of that landslide? What was behind all of this? I was there, observing, and I wondered if anyone would have the answers. But I knew that the real story of that woman was yet to come. And what happened next changed everything. She didn't just become a victim of a landslide. She became someone who carried a secret capable of turning the entire understanding of that disaster upside down. Because, at that moment, I realized her story had something deeper, something that would make everyone around her question, how far was the truth willing to be hidden? And it was when she finally opened her eyes, there in the hospital, that the tension began to turn into something much bigger. The woman, her eyes still filled with pain, spoke for the first time. The words she said weren't related to what everyone imagined, but to something no one knew. Something no one could have imagined. What she was about to reveal in that hospital room would shake everything everyone thought they knew about what had happened in the city. And from that moment on, the search for the truth would become a much more dangerous game than anyone had thought. When the woman finally woke up, she was fragile, but her eyes were more alive than ever. The shock still consumed her body, but her mind seemed focused on something beyond the physical pain. She looked around at everyone with a distant gaze, as if she were in another place, far from everything happening around her. It was then that one of the doctors entered the room, trying to calm her, and she, almost imperceptibly, asked to speak. I didn't know what to expect, but when she stared at me, I realized something was about to happen. She looked at me, and her voice, weak, almost a whisper, said, "The landslide, it wasn't just nature." These words, said with such clarity, froze me for a moment. What did she mean by that? What was behind all of this? Wasn't it just a natural disaster? Or was there something much bigger involving all of us? She continued, her breathing labored, but the determination in her words was clear. I know what happened. And I know who is behind this. The tension in the room increased drastically. The air felt dense, heavy. She was hiding something, but what? Who would have an interest in causing a landslide? How could a simple pregnant woman have access to such crucial information? Her words, although vague, suggested there was a conspiracy, something much darker and deeper than any of us had imagined. I knew it wouldn't be easy to understand what she was trying to tell us. Each word she spoke was a clue, but also a riddle. And she didn't seem ready to give us the solution. Somehow, she was reluctant to reveal everything at once. Fear was written on her face, but something told me she had much more to say. When she spoke about who was behind this, I felt a huge twist, a sensation that this was bigger than all the natural disasters that had occurred in recent years. Because this wasn't about a natural tragedy. It wasn't just the force of nature at play. It was a conspiracy involving far more than the town, far more than the landslide. But despite what she said, there were no clear answers. No one knew who was behind this or what the motive was. The authorities were dealing with the destruction, with the rescues, but no one seemed to realize the complexity of what she was suggesting. Everyone was so focused on the disaster itself that the possibility of a human hand behind it all seemed like an absurd idea, even impossible. The woman, however, was determined to tell us, but in a very cautious way. She was scared. Scared of what might happen to her and everyone around her. It was as if she had been forced to keep a secret for some time, and now, having been rescued, she was trying to piece together a puzzle scattered in a chaotic manner. She couldn't just expose everything at once. She knew that the truth, no matter how important, had the power to destroy even more lives. I tried to understand what she was saying, but with each word, more questions arose. I knew this wasn't just a survival story. It was something much more complex. Something no one was willing to see. The landslide hadn't been just an accident. She knew that, and I had to find out why. Before falling into a deep sleep again, the woman left one last sentence hanging in the air. "The father of my child. You'll never believe who he is." She looked at me, an intense gaze, as if begging me to understand, to know that this had to do with something much bigger. And it was at that moment that something shifted inside me. I knew that by discovering the truth about the landslide, I would also uncover the true meaning of that secret. And perhaps this was the beginning of something neither she nor I could predict. But the question was, how would we uncover the truth without putting our own lives at risk? She knew, but something was stopping her from revealing everything. She was afraid. And I was increasingly convinced that the greatest danger wasn't in the rubble of the landslide, but in the truth she was keeping. And the worst part, this truth was about to change everything we knew about that town, the people, and above all, the fate of everyone involved. Now, the question was, who was the father of the baby? And why did this seem to be the key to understanding everything that had happened? The answer was close, but I felt that it wasn't yet time to know. The tension was about to rise even further, and I knew that, when the truth was finally revealed, it would forever change the course of everyone's history. The woman's words echoed in my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the growing doubt inside me. Who was behind all of this? Who was the father of the baby, and how did this tie into the landslide? Every time I thought about these questions, more obstacles emerged, not just in my path, but also in the search for answers. I knew that the city was in ruins, but it wasn't just the physical destruction I should fear. The real threat lay in the hidden truth, in what she still wasn't willing to reveal. As the rescuers tried to control the situation, the days passed, and the woman remained silent. Every visit to the hospital felt more tense than the last. When she finally said something, her words were disconnected, but the message was clear. Someone very important was involved in what had happened. What had begun as a simple rescue had turned into an investigation involving far more than I could have imagined. The landslide hadn't been a mere accident of nature. It wasn't a simple tragedy that could be explained by the weather conditions and the state of the mountains. There was much more at stake, something that transcended any explanation. The local authorities were busy dealing with recovery and rescue efforts, and at one point, it seemed like the woman would become just another victim among so many others. However, my intuition wouldn't let me rest. Something was wrong. And that was why I knew that if we didn't take the initiative to understand what she knew, we might never learn the true reason behind it all. I started trying to get closer to her. Every time I spoke to the doctors, to the other survivors, it became clear that no one knew much more than I did. The woman was staying silent. She didn't trust anyone, and the fear that consumed her was palpable. She felt that speaking out could bring more pain to her and to the baby, but she knew that keeping the secret wouldn't protect her forever. That night, after the worst of the aftermath had passed, something inside me told me it was time to go to her, to try again. I went to the hospital, not knowing what to expect, only with the feeling that the answer was close. When I entered her room, she was once again alone, staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. But before I could say anything, she turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were clearer, more focused. I realized something had changed. She finally seemed ready to speak. "You're not going to understand what I'm about to say, but if you really want to know the truth, then listen carefully." She breathed deeply and glanced around, as if fearing someone might overhear. The landslide, it was orchestrated. And it wasn't just anyone who caused it. She paused long, as though choosing her words carefully. I was tense, waiting for what would come next. "The person who caused all of this is someone you know. Someone very close. We can't trust anyone." With each word, more questions arose. Who could this person be? Why was she saying this now? The tension inside me multiplied, and a sense of urgency took over. It was clear that if this were true, we were dealing with something much larger than a simple natural disaster. Someone had manipulated the situation, but who? What did they want from it? She looked at me with a heavy gaze. You can't talk about this yet, but I promise you that when the time comes, you'll understand. The landslide, what happened there, was just the beginning, and you'll have to be ready to face the truth when it's finally revealed. Her words left me even more confused. I didn't know what to think. How could someone orchestrate something so devastating, so catastrophic? What would they gain from it? And, most importantly, who was really behind all of this? I knew the woman was hiding more than she was willing to say. She hadn't told everything. There was something even bigger, something she feared, something she knew could put everyone at risk. But the question was, what exactly was she afraid of? I couldn't help but think that the secret she held wasn't just tied to her, but to something much more complex, a network of people and intentions that went far beyond what anyone could imagine. As she spoke, I felt we were getting closer to something that would change everything. She had started revealing what seemed like a big truth, but the tension in the air indicated that we were far from fully understanding what was at stake. What she knew could be the key to understanding the landslide, but it was also the key to opening doors that no one might want opened. She was in danger, and now I was too. Every word she said pushed me closer to an abyss that I didn't know if I could face. But at the same time, I couldn't turn back. Her secret was bigger than everything, and my search for the truth was just beginning. The tension in the air was growing heavier. Every word she spoke seemed like a riddle I couldn't fully decipher. The woman was clearly distressed, but at the same time, there was a determination in her eyes, as if she knew there was no turning back. When she finally spoke, the revelation left me frozen for a moment. I know who's behind all of this, and you know this person very well. The way she said it made my heart race. Who could be involved in this? And more importantly, who was this person I knew? I stared at her with complete surprise. Who? I asked, trying to hide the urgency in my voice. She took a deep breath, and before speaking, glanced out the window again, as if she feared being overheard. You're going to hate me when you find out the truth. But I can't keep this secret anymore. She began, and her grave tone made me lean forward, hanging on every word. The father of my child, he's not who you think. I furrowed my brow, trying to comprehend what she meant by that. Shock washed over me, but I kept my composure. The woman, still visibly tense, began telling a story I never could have imagined. I was in a relationship with someone of high power in the city, someone very influential. He's the real one behind all of this. He manipulated the conditions, made what happened happen, also the landslide would take place. And the worst part, he never wanted me to have this child. I was speechless. The woman was revealing a connection I could have never anticipated. How could someone with so much power in the city be involved in something so terrible? How could he plan something so devastating? It was as if with each new revelation, the story became more surreal and, at the same time, more terrifying. She looked at me with a mix of fear and pain. He used the disaster to take advantage of something, of me. And I only realized it too late. It's only now, after everything that happened, that I see what he wanted. He never wanted me to have this child. And he knew that if something like this happened, my life and the baby's would be in danger. Her revelation was like an explosion, tearing apart everything I thought was real. This wasn't just a landslide caused by the force of nature. No. Everything had been manipulated, orchestrated by someone who knew the city's vulnerabilities and knew how to exploit moments of weakness. But what shocked me the most was realizing that, somehow, this woman was at the center of it all, and the baby she carried was, in a way, the catalyst for this tragedy. I tried, all the time, to push this person out of my life, but he was always stronger, more determined. Now, with what happened, with the destruction of the city, he thinks no one will find me anymore. But I'm here. And you need to know this before he silences me for good." She seemed to be losing strength with each word, as though fearing that by speaking more, the danger would get closer still. I looked at her, trying to understand the magnitude of what was being revealed. This wasn't just about the landslide. It was about power, manipulation, and fear. The woman I was helping, who seemed like a victim, was actually immersed in a web of lies and manipulations, and the revelation of the father of the baby was the key to unraveling it all. But the most disturbing thing was when she said, "I don't know where he is now, but he knows where I am. And if he finds out I've spoken, what happened to the city will seem small compared to what he'll be capable of." The threat was no longer veiled. It was real. The impact of this revelation wasn't just about what she said, but what it implied for all of us. The landslide, which initially seemed like a natural disaster, now revealed itself as part of a much larger, much more calculated plan. The city, the woman, and the baby were caught up in a dangerous web, where the real culprits hid in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I felt that with every second, the danger was escalating. The woman was, in a way, trying to warn me, but at the same time, she knew she was putting all of us at risk. But now, I was in a position where I couldn't turn back. I had to move forward and uncover the truth. Because if I didn't, the city, the woman, and her baby would be lost forever in the darkness of a secret that was now much closer to being uncovered. I left the hospital that day with my mind racing, trying to process everything I had just heard. The woman's words were pounding in my head, and I knew I could never look at the city the same way again. It was no longer just about a natural disaster, a catastrophe that happened by chance. No, this was part of something much more sinister, something that stretched far beyond the simple destruction the city had suffered. The woman spoke with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. I knew that if I really wanted to understand what was happening, I would have to act quickly. I couldn't wait for the truth to fall into my lap. Time was running out, and with every passing moment, the feeling that we were being watched grew stronger. Who else knew what she knew? Who else had an interest in keeping all of this a secret? The truth she had started to reveal couldn't just be about her. It couldn't just be about the baby. This was connected to someone powerful, someone controlling more than I could imagine. I knew that to uncover this story, I would have to go beyond the city's limits. There were clues and connections that went further than the walls of our small community. And the first step in that was to learn more about the man she had mentioned. The father of the baby. I couldn't let him remain anonymous. I needed to know who he was and how he was involved in all of this. With that in mind, I began my investigation. I went to the city hall, where, after much effort, I gained access to local records, trying to find any link the man had with the city. Names, contacts, transactions. Nothing seemed to directly connect the landslide to him, but there was something in the file that caught my attention, a record of a large donation made months before the disaster. A significant sum, donated by a foundation with ties to the region's largest construction company. The company's name was there, but it didn't directly say who was behind it. What I knew, however, was that this type of donation wasn't something someone would do without a very specific reason. But what was he trying to achieve? I continued the search in secret, not telling anyone about my new discoveries. The more I dug, the more I felt I was on the right track, but the more I also felt like I was being followed, watched. Fear was palpable. The sensation of being observed wouldn't leave me. With every step I took, I felt something or someone was watching me closely. As I investigated, I found some information about the man the woman had mentioned. He was a high-ranking executive at one of the country's largest construction companies, with strong political connections. But the most shocking thing was what I found at the end of the records. He had a direct connection to the infrastructure projects in the mountainous region, the same projects that were being questioned after the landslide. It wasn't just a donation. It was a strategic alliance to gain control over the area, and the disaster, as tragic as it was, seemed like a calculated opportunity to eliminate obstacles that could interfere with his plans. I began to understand what was happening. The landslide hadn't just been a natural catastrophe. It had been orchestrated, and the man involved knew that by causing the destruction, he would have the power to reorganize the city, to take control of the land and the contracts that had once been out of his reach. But this didn't explain what the woman had to do with it all. She wasn't just a victim. She was at the center of it in a way I still couldn't fully grasp. It was at that moment that the woman sought me out again. She looked visibly more agitated than before, her face marked with worry. "He knows I'm talking. He knows you're after the truth," she said, gasping for breath. "You can't investigate alone anymore. You have to stop, before it's too late." I stared at her, trying to understand. "What are you saying? What's happening?" She looked around, as if searching for something. "He has people everywhere. At City Hall, in the hospitals, in the security forces. He'll do whatever it takes to silence us. Don't you see? We're not just victims of a disaster. We're in the middle of a bigger game, and he's manipulating everything. The baby. What you don't understand is that if he finds out the child I'm carrying is his, everything will become more complicated. He won't want anyone to know." Those words were etched in my mind. The woman was completely right about one thing. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous it became. The man she was talking about wasn't just a powerful figure in the city. He was embedded in every aspect of local life, and he knew exactly how to manipulate the system in his favor. He didn't just control construction projects. He also had the power to manipulate events to ensure he came out victorious, no matter the cost. I knew that from that moment on, I couldn't trust anyone. Every step I took, every person I approached, could be a trap to steer me further away from the truth. But something stronger was pushing me forward. I couldn't stop. Not while the woman and the baby were in danger. Not while the city was under the control of someone using fear and destruction to achieve his own interests. I had to continue. And with every new clue I uncovered, the mystery grew darker. What was being concealed was much bigger than any of us could imagine. I knew that to fully unravel this story, I would have to keep going. But one thing was clear: the truth wouldn't come without more sacrifices. And I was about to pay a very high price to uncover it. The tension was at its peak. The clues I had followed so far began to intertwine in such a terrifying way that I could barely believe what I was uncovering. The man the woman called the father of her child wasn't just a powerful executive. He was the mastermind behind a much larger scheme. He had manipulated the landslide, not only to gain control of the city but to do something even more terrible, to hide a secret he feared would be revealed. Something that, if it came to light, could destroy his life and any trace of power he still had. Meanwhile, the woman was seeking me out, increasingly desperate. Her fear was evident, but there was something else in her gaze now, a strength, a determination, as if she had finally decided to rebel. The moment of truth was drawing near, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a disturbing way. One night, as I was preparing to investigate further, she appeared at my house. Her expression was more serious than ever. "I knew this would happen," she began, her voice low and tense. "But I didn't know it would happen so quickly." She looked on the verge of collapse, but the urgency in her tone left me no doubt. The worst was yet to come, and there was no more time to hesitate. "You don't understand. It's not just about the landslide. It's not just about the destruction of the city. Everything was planned to hide the greatest truth of all. The man I'm talking about, he's not just the father of my child. He's much more than that. He's responsible for the deaths of many people, not just in the city, but in other regions too. And what he has to do with what happened here, that's just the tip of the iceberg." I was speechless. The revelations she was making now were even more shocking. I knew the man was involved in big financial and political interests, but this? He was involved in deaths. Had he killed people? How did this all connect? She continued, her eyes filled with pain and fear. He's killed before. He's killed to protect his secrets, to maintain control. And you have to understand one thing. If he finds out we're uncovering everything, he won't stop. He will do the impossible to silence us. He'll destroy anyone who tries to expose him. And now, with what you know, you're in danger too. I looked at her, trying to grasp the magnitude of what she was saying. How could he be behind so many deaths? How could someone with so much power kill to maintain his interests? And more importantly, what was he trying to hide? The answer to that was somewhere much deeper than I had imagined, and the woman now seemed to be the key to it all. But how much of the truth did she really know? The woman, with a look of desperation, made a move that made me swallow hard. She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket, something carefully folded. This is the name of a person he killed. A person who knew too much, who could have exposed everything, but was silenced. What you need to know is that this person was involved in everything, and they knew the secret he's been trying to hide. Now, if you want to understand what's really going on, you need to find the name on this paper. I looked at the paper, but before I could ask anything more, she was abruptly interrupted. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed at the door. Someone was coming. He knows, she whispered, and in a desperate gesture, pushed the piece of paper into my hands. Don't look for me again. Don't try to understand. He's after you now, and I can't protect you. Before I could react, she vanished. Everything happened so quickly. Suddenly, I found myself alone, with that small piece of paper, a name I wasn't sure what it meant, but that now became the key to uncovering the truth. The woman had left me with the information that, according to her, would be our salvation. But at the same time, there was a deadly risk in following this lead. I looked at the paper, the unknown name, and a cold sensation ran down my spine. What else could be hidden behind this web of lies and deaths? What was he really trying to conceal? And why did that person, who seemingly knew too much, have to die? Now, I knew I was closer to the truth, but I was also closer to danger. There would be no turning back. The woman was right. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Who else was involved in this dirty game? Time was against me, and the truth seemed to be distorting as I got closer to its final revelation. I needed to find out what the man was hiding, but I knew that, to do so, I would have to face the very system he had created. What little hope remained was now in my hands, but the risk of losing everything was greater than ever. The answer was near, but the question was, would I survive long enough to discover it? The night was silent, but I knew nothing around me was safe. The name on the piece of paper burned in my hands, and a sense of imminent danger surrounded me. The woman had left me with a key, but I didn't know if I was ready to turn the lock. I was already in something much larger than I had imagined, and with every step, I sank deeper into a web of corruption, death, and manipulation. With the name in hand, I decided to follow the only lead left, the person mentioned on the piece of paper. The connection to the man behind the landslide became clearer by the second. The woman had spoken of an important person, someone who knew more than anyone about the secrets of the disaster but had been silenced. Now, I knew I needed to learn more about this death, who committed it, and what it meant. What I didn't know was that this would lead me to a much bigger shock than I could have anticipated. I went to the house where the person mentioned on the paper had lived. It was an isolated place, a house away from the city but still within the limits of the disaster zone. When I arrived, the door was ajar, and fear spread quickly inside me. The woman had warned me not to continue, not to search for more answers, but the desire to understand the truth was stronger. I entered cautiously, and as I approached a small office at the back of the house, a chill ran down my spine. The place was in complete silence, and the furniture was covered in a blanket of dust. But what caught my attention most was a series of documents spread out on the desk, with images of the landslide, people, land, and areas of the city. Everything was interconnected, but what truly terrified me was the name of the man the woman had told me about, and how deeply he was connected to the owner of the house. The documents left no doubt. The man behind the landslide was much more than a simple executive. He was the true owner of a network of companies, a network that seemed to control the entire city. And more, he wasn't just trying to gain power by building new projects. He was manipulating the disaster to get rid of any obstacle in his path. But what disturbed me most was when I saw the name of the woman I had been following. She was listed there, with a simple but lethal note, the witness to be silenced. Everything I had known up to that point had been a game of lies. The woman, the baby, the landslide, everything was part of a meticulously crafted plan to destroy those who could expose the truth. The man had wanted the disaster to happen. He didn't want to get caught. He didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. So, he had silenced this person, the last witness who could have exposed his web of corruption. With my heart racing, I realized the gravity of the situation. What had started as a simple investigation had turned into a nightmare. This wasn't just a plan to gain power. No. He was masking murders, manipulating public opinion, and orchestrating disasters as a way to cover his true intentions. He wanted to eliminate any chance that the truth would come to light. He knew that if his name were discovered, it would be the end. At that moment, everything changed. The woman wasn't just a victim. She had been a key piece, a witness whose value he couldn't ignore. She didn't know it, but her baby, her child, was the last connection between him and the secret he had hidden. Her pregnancy wasn't just a coincidence. It was the final proof of a network of manipulation and death, and if she had the courage to expose everything, he would lose control forever. I was at a crossroads. I knew the woman was in danger, but now I knew I was too. Because the truth I was about to reveal wasn't just about the landslide or a natural disaster. It was about absolute power, manipulation, and the price of truth. The city, the woman, the baby, all were now at the mercy of a control network that would stop at nothing to silence anyone who knew the truth. As I left the house, one thought dominated my mind. The woman was safer with the truth than with a lie, but she didn't know how dangerous that truth really was. The man behind everything wasn't just worried about saving his own skin. He was willing to destroy everything and everyone in his way. Now, there was no turning back. I had the answers, and I knew it was time to act. But at the same time, I felt the weight of everything that was at stake. If the truth were exposed, many would lose, including me. What would happen to the woman, to the baby, to the entire city once the secret was revealed? I only knew one thing. The truth was at my doorstep, and the man behind everything would do anything to make sure I never opened it. As I looked at the city, now scarred by destruction and pain, I realized that despite all the suffering, there was something that couldn't be erased, the truth. Even though it had been hidden for so long, manipulated and distorted to protect powerful interests, it had emerged, and that would change everything. The man behind it all, the one who thought he controlled everything with his lies, didn't understand that the truth has its own power. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, he became more desperate, more dangerous, because he knew that when the truth was exposed, his empire of lies would collapse. He believed he could destroy lives, destroy cities, but he didn't realize that by trying to eliminate the pieces that could reveal his secrets, he was only making the truth harder to erase. That night, as I reflected on everything that had happened, the woman, the baby, the entire city, one thing became clear to me. The fight wasn't just about one victim or a natural disaster. The fight was about power, control, and, most importantly, the ability to rise after a fall. I knew that despite the pain, the loss, and the destruction, there was something greater at stake. The pregnant woman wasn't just a symbol of a life being destroyed. She was the key to the truth, the last hope for justice. Her child, that baby, wasn't just a part of the story of one woman and one powerful man. He was the representation of a future that could be shaped, A new chance for a city that, despite being broken, held in its hands the power to rebuild. When the woman left me that piece of paper, when she spoke her first words, I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't know that that simple act of courage, that impulse to not let the truth die, would become the key to bringing down an empire of lies and manipulation. But in the end, that's exactly what happened. The truth was exposed, and with it came justice. I learned that, in the end, saving a life isn't just about saving one person. It's about saving a future. When you save someone, when you defend the truth, you're not just protecting the present. You're ensuring that future generations don't live in the shadow of lies and manipulation. As the city began to rebuild, with the truth now in plain sight for everyone to see, I reflected on what had happened. The landslide, the death, the destruction, it was all a reflection of what happens when lies pile up and power is placed in the wrong hands. But it was also a reminder of what we can achieve when we seek the truth, when we have the courage to confront what's hidden, and finally, fight for what's right. And the final lesson I carried with me, the one that remained engraved in my soul, was something the woman told me that day, with tired eyes and a broken voice, but with immense strength. Because, in the end, saving a life is saving an entire world. And that has never stopped being true.